Well, hello and welcome to another edition of the Ducks Confidential Podcast. I, of course, am James Crepia, the Oregon Ducks beat reporter for the Oregonian and OregonLive. And on this edition of the episode, I'm joined by our columnist at the Oregonian and OregonLive, Mr. Bill Oram, who has joined us before. And we will go over kind of at the midpoint of things. Bill will have a assessment of where Oregon is now, a little bit of a holistic recap of the first 6 games and where the Ducks stand as of today. And then also, obviously, going forward. And not so much an early look at UCLA specifically, but more of an early look at the second half of the season as Oregon is in its bye week, coming off of the very lopsided win over Arizona, which I never intended to be going over the Arizona game in depth anyway, but there, quite honestly, was just not much to say from 49-22 that has a lot of depth because truly the most basic way of looking at this, in my perspective, is Oregon is significantly better than Arizona. They knew that going in.
Yeah.
The old Dennis Green line, the late Dennis Green of, they are who they thought they were. Arizona's not a good team. They're a team that is very much in rebuilding, that has an athletic quarterback and 3 really good receivers, 1 or 2 decent defenders, and that's it. And we knew that. So I'm not, what is there to say about 49-22? Oregon is a better team. It showed it pillar to post. The most impressive stat of the night to me was the no tackles for loss allowed, because I don't care who you play, that's hard to do on air. And that was really impressive. But you watched it as well, Bill, and obviously been keeping tabs on Oregon State as well, so you get a little bit more of a holistic view of the Pac-12 than most of us, taking a look at more games on a given weekend than even I at times. So your perspective on at least this past Saturday, and like I say, then we'll take kind of a broader lens view of things for the Ducks so far.
I mean, I just thought that it was the kind of dominant win that you expect from a conference contender against a team that's down in 8th, 9th, 10th in the conference. You could tell that Arizona had sort of a strategy coming in and knew they couldn't get behind because of how explosive the Oregon offense has been, and they took the ball first and tried to sort of establish themselves offensively, but
and did
kind of see
quite, and to their credit, they did. They moved the ball.
You could sort of see the tightening clench of the Ducks as the game went on, and it was just further establishment of how effective this offense has been. Like, I'm blown away by the Ducks offense. I mean, not to go big picture right off the bat here, but if you'd told me early on that the Ducks would have the best offense in the conference, and then where they would have their struggles would be defensively, that was not what I was led to believe was going to be the hallmark of this team coming into the season, and especially after that Georgia game, right? When not that anything looked like the hallmark of this team with the missed tackles and the defensive performance, but offensively, the Ducks were felt very rudderless, without an identity. And then you fast forward a couple of weeks, and that looks like an offense that really knows what it's doing. Kenny Dillingham has really maximized Bo Nix. The running game has been extremely potent with kind of the by committee attack. So I mean, I've just been really impressed by the Ducks offensively, and I thought that was on display in Tucson.
Yeah, the big thing to me was, I say, the no tackles for loss allowed, where the ultimately the strength that we knew the entire offseason, from the minute that the starting 5 all announced that they were coming back, which, to be honest, if you go back from just the starting 5 as a whole last December, if you take it back all the way to Pac-12 Media Day 2021, the minute that Alex Forsythe said he was coming back, it was almost a foregone conclusion that meant that Ryan Walk was also coming back. You knew that a younger player like a Jackson Powers Johnson, obviously there was no decision to be had there. That was a given. And then it became, all right, you needed to know about TJ and Saleh. And Saleh, momentarily was gone and ultimately came back. And then Stephen Jones during the bowl game announcing he was coming back. So the minute that you had those guys, it became obvious that the strength of this team was going to be the offensive line. It's been on display the entire season, but it was again on Saturday. And when you see that, that is what sets the tone all the time. It's amazing how much better, and we'll get obviously into the broader picture of this, but it's amazing how much better everybody plays, particularly a quarterback plays, when they're not facing constant pressure.
Yeah.
And that's a credit to the offensive line. And it's also, to be fair, holistically, call it what it is for an evaluating Bo Nix. He's not playing SEC defenses every week.
Mm-hmm.
So, in particular, coming off this Arizona game and even the Stanford game, quite frankly. So the past 2 weeks, these are really bad defenses. And you just got to call it what it is. They're really bad. They're really bad statistically. They're really bad in how they played against Oregon. And they're really bad in terms of top-end NFL talent, and guess what? They're going to play Colorado still in the second half of the season, and they're not very good either. In fact, they're probably one of the worst in the country in every category. So there is something to be said for when you have better protection, maximizing the opportunity, and how much better you play in general. And again, even the Georgia game, as ugly as that was, they did move the ball pretty consistently. They just kept shooting themselves in the foot. Right. The 2 turnovers, the second one obviously being particularly egregious. But outside of the second turnover, they were moving the ball really effectively. And the first turnover, you just say, hey, that's an incredible play by the defensive back on a long throw. Not a big deal. Since then, they have not played, outside of Washington State's defense, a particularly good defense. And even that defense doesn't have a bevy of NFL players on it. Stanford's got a absolutely terrific cornerback in Kyu Blu Kelly. And Kendall Williamson at safety is probably going to be a player in the league. And Arizona has a terrific cornerback in Christian Roland Wallace and a solid safety in Jackson Turner. In both of those games, the past 2 weeks, all those players that I just mentioned all got hurt during the games, other than Roland Wallace. Everybody else got hurt in the game. And in Stanford's case, both those guys were basically out the entire second half. So even the limited talent that Oregon's most recent opponents have had, you can either easily avoid, or in the cases of the game specifically, they literally got hurt during the game, unfortunately, and didn't even have to play Oregon all that much, and then it made it an advantage even more glaring. But in the front seven, Oregon has not been challenged at all by anybody, partially because their offensive line is that good, and partially because the opposing front sevens last 5 weeks are not good. They're not very talented. BYU is far and away the best of the group, quite honestly. And schematically, Washington State's is the best by that group. That is going to change rather dramatically here in the second half of the season. But it's like I say, in evaluating things so far from what we've seen, as much credit as is due, and there is much, there is also a degree of context in saying, yeah, but let's not forget here that Stanford is 110th in scoring defense, that Arizona is 115th in scoring defense. We're not even going to mention Eastern Washington. So, there's something to be said for, yes, doing well, playing extremely well, even against bad competition, is still noteworthy in that if you played poorly against bad competition, we'd be saying, oh my God, how bad is this? This is a mess. You can't even beat up on the bad teams. That kind of perspective. No, and I think that's kind of, to your point, Bill, I think part of what this fan base, particularly over the last 4 years, after games like Stanford, quite frankly, where, look, the Stanford team of 2018, 2019, even 2020, was certainly better than the Stanford teams of the past 2 seasons. But the 2019 win at Stanford at the time, a lot of this fan base was almost dissatisfied with that kind of a win. And I remember saying afterward, going, I don't know what y'all are expecting. I don't know. I think a multi-score win on the road at Stanford, a place that's not exactly been very kind over the last 10, 15 years, take it and be happy with it kind of thing. But this is a fan base who wants to see the explosive offense. This is a fan base who wants to beat up on teams that they feel are inferior by a significant margin, and not just have to grind games out and play that kind of style that they were at times. Well, now, at the halfway point of this season, it is that they're beating up on the bad teams. They are, and that's a credit to them. They are playing stylistically speaking, not just that at 5-1 they are where they quote unquote ought to be, because they are. That's just being realistic. But stylistically, to your point, I think folks are pretty satisfied over the last 5 weeks because they are playing the way as this fan base had grown accustomed to. Whether that's realistic or not is beside the point. They started to grow accustomed to being one of the leading offenses in the country. It was putting up 40-plus points every week and 4 and 5 and 600 yards every week, and not being a particularly bland style of play. Well, they've gone out and done that, and I think that's kind of the big picture to me of how this offense has looked. To your point, is definitely probably more in the mold of what many Oregon fans were hoping to see this season.
Well, and you get to establish your identity, and that's why this schedule really, to me, lined up so well for the Ducks. And listen, there are games they could have lost along the way. As you said, it is hard to win games. Ask Washington how hard it is to win games week in and week out. But to me, the fact that you did have, BYU was certainly projected as a tough game. The Ducks made, pretty quick work of BYU. Washington State could have easily been a loss. But aside from that, you've had weeks where you've really been able to sort of fine tune that offensive identity, and you've seen it work. The fact that it's against Stanford and Arizona, to me, should not be completely dismissed. Like you said, I mean, you're doing what you need to do there, and now you've got 6 weeks of a body of work going into a bye week, going into what is the biggest game of the year against UCLA. It really lines up really, really nicely for the Ducks, where they're able to kind of take that body of work from the first 6 weeks and then fine tune it in practice, with the bye week going into, what is a, by midseason standards, about as big as it gets in the Pac-12.
Yeah. And the other aspect of this for the past 2 weeks, even in dominant wins, again, I no question about it. I mean, the end results, the scoreboard speaks for themselves. The other part, and while this past week against Arizona was the most complete game of Oregon's season so far, I would argue, while it was the most complete, that there were still very much areas to not just improve, but, and look, Jed Fish said going into the game, he was laying the groundwork for that fan base. If it didn't even take a very deep reading between the lines to understand that Jed Fish was basically telling the Arizona fan base, I am so happy for your support. Thank you so much for coming to a sellout, which, by the way, was not a sellout. It may have been a sellout by money, but it was not a sellout by attendance. But be that as it may. Thanks for the support. Thrilled. Just be aware, we're not very good, and we're still part of a build. There's going to be, as he put, ebbs and flows. In other words, we're going to lose, and I need you to show up again. So please do that when we're playing a game that we're not going to absolutely lose. He said that going into the game. Afterward, and here's the thing to his credit, as he points out, not just because this is silver linings. Again, this is a coach who's calling it as it was, like what I think is going to build Arizona back to being something far more formidable. But he's absolutely right. If you take outside of, in terms of how the finish, all right, yeah, it's garbage time. Oh, well, it's a lopsided score. Well, Oregon doesn't have to try that hard. All true. But he's got a young team who he's got to develop. And guess what? They scored the final 10 points of that game. 9 points with a failed extra point. Well, and that spanned the final, 20 minutes. So this idea that, like, yes, it was a complete game because it's 49-22 and it was really 49-13 with 20 minutes to play. Yeah, but Oregon starters were still in for a couple of series after that, and they were no longer clicking. Now, to the point, who cares when you're up 30-some-odd points?
Right.
Meant nothing to the outcome. But in terms of when you want to talk about complete 60-minute football games, it was the most so. But whether it's Arizona who can step away saying, hey, look, obviously the game is in hand, but there were things they were looking to do and accomplish, and they did. Or if it's Stanford in the way that obviously that second half, Stanford outscored them 24-14 in the second half. And we know about the penalties and other things. Well, again, starters got pulled, this, that, the other. I understand. I'm saying simply that even in the most recent 2 games where they were blowouts and they were able to pull guys eventually and get second-team guys in, and second-team guys, many of whom played really well, they still didn't completely finish to the point of sheer dominance for 60 minutes. They didn't treat one of their Pac-12 opponents yet like they treated Eastern Washington, is what I'm getting at. So, and UCLA is not going to be the example necessarily to do that. Now, Colorado might be, but we'll see when that trip comes up. But
I mean, Eastern Washington would probably beat Colorado this year. I'm very comfortable saying
pretty confident.
The top 5 teams in the Big Sky Conference can all beat Colorado.
I would not disagree. They are a woeful team right now. And look, that's going to be part of their rebuild in the years ahead. But holistically, for Oregon at this point, in terms of what we have learned, some of the big picture stuff of what we've learned, what stood out to us, etc. We've mentioned the offense a little bit. To me, I start with, when we already know about the O-line, I think some of the big questions that we had in the offseason in terms of, all right, starting with quarterback, hey, even if you very much were under the impression that it was presumably going to be Bo Nix, which I felt was a pretty good presumption most of the offseason, but, to each their own, what exactly you were going to get with him.
Totally.
And he has, again, look, I'm not just, I'm not one to look just, hey, skip past the Georgia game because Georgia's that good and it was the season opener and that was, 5-6 weeks ago. No, because guess what? If you're an Oregon fan still clinging to hope, still clinging to the infinitesimal chance, still saying, hey, well, we got this big undefeated, matchup with undefeated UCLA, who, by the way, hasn't played anybody outside of Utah, but that's neither here nor there. So, don't tell me about how great UCLA is when they barely beat, South Alabama or whatever. Stop. We got this big marquee matchup coming up. You got Utah and Washington and Oregon State in November. And then, hey, if they make it to Vegas, hope to play an undefeated USC. So therefore, project out 10 weeks from now and tell me about how this team still has a fraction of a chance of a college football playoff berth. Well, if you want to play in a playoff, then you better consider the entire body of work, which means being blown out, which means throwing an unforgivable interception, which means having a tough time with that team.
Mm-hmm.
So, you don't just throw it out because it was 6 weeks ago because it doesn't serve your purposes today. So there are things to be said for, when they played the very best competition out there, they got blown off the stage. But in the inferior competition they have played the last 5 weeks, they have stood out very well. And how Nix has played over those 5 weeks has been excellent. His decision-making has improved each and every week. He has rarely put the ball in jeopardy in general, let alone this past week where really not at all. And in the situational splits that really defined his Auburn career, all right, hey, I'm not saying Arizona was a tough place to play. It was not. Wazoo was. In its fourth quarter, he got a score, and not just the go-ahead drive, the drive to keep it alive before that. And for as much as there is to rave about the throw to Chase Cota this past week, and it was a great one, the throw to Bucky Irving on 4th and 2 on the drive that ended with the Cam McCormick touchdown at Wazoo, not the Troy Franklin touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
That is the throw of the season so far. Not even close. I mean, that was so far and away an absolutely outrageous throw. That was incredible. And those are the things that if you had said to any of us, not just to me, to you, if you said to any Oregon fan, hey, you're going to get that throw. If you said to anybody since Bo Nix showed up in the first week of January that their quarterback is going to play and make a play like that on the road, down scores, fourth quarter, 4th and 2, to a running back who in January wasn't even, part of the program.
Right.
People would have, absolutely fallen over themselves to agree to such things.
Well, and I think, similarly, I think that we were all pretty much on the same wavelength that it was going to be Bo Nix as the starter. But I mean, I remember having conversations with people in July where it was like, yeah, he's going to start, but is he going to be the week 4 starter? You know what I mean? Like, is he going to be is he going to be the guy kind of for the duration? And I think obviously that was the plan, but I think it was easy enough to talk yourself into the idea that, he'd come in and take his hits and, he wasn't, you'd see kind of the worst version that we saw, from time to time at Auburn, and, then it would be someone else's turn. And it's been the polar opposite of that, where he has not only, been, not only been good enough to hang on to the job. I mean, he's been exceptional. And like you said, he's gotten better. The decision making has gotten better. I'd have to think. I didn't see much of the Stanford game, if I'm being honest, James. Was his last real bad decision, or was his last ugly play really that pick six at Wazoo? Has there been anything since then?
And even that, quite honestly, was not a terrible decision. It just wasn't. It was a hell of a play by the defender. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, throwing the ball to Sean Dollars in that spot, on the way that play was set up, was not a bad decision. It was more in that, because of the way the play went down, the linebacker went over the top of the receivers who were blocking on the edge, and taking up their defenders, and basically, for all intents and purposes, from where Nix was and where he could see and whatnot, and he basically had to anticipate that the linebacker could do that and that was going to happen. In and of itself, though, throwing to the running back in that for the play, which is how it was designed, was not a bad decision. It was just that matter of like how the throw was actually thrown. Like if you either throw it on an absolute dart and you're not floating it out there, okay, well the linebacker can't make up the ground that fast. Or conversely, if you either pump fake or just float it out to the deeper into the end zone, the backer is going to have a harder time doing that. Either it's going to get broken up potentially, or it's just going to be an easy catch for Dollars. So even that decision, which was, yes, a pick six, so therefore it must have been bad. Well, it was bad in the end result, but like I say, I don't think the decision itself was necessarily egregious. It was just a hell of a play. And, like I say, it came down to more about how the ball was thrown rather than where it was thrown, on that particular one. But yeah, that's really about it. There was, I think, maybe one other, that was maybe one other ball in that game where, between you had like the tip pass, basically, I think it was to Ferguson. I want to say it was in that game, where it just kind of, it may have been that one or BYU, where this like just kind of worked out, or there was one where, it either got broken up or, a defender got a hand on it, at Wazoo, I think on a ball to Coda over the middle. But no, short of that, the past 2 weeks, the Stanford game, there were the two deep throws, into, it ends up looking like double coverage at the end of the play, and it kind of sort of is, because I say kind of sort of because it's not inherent double coverage from the jump. It's more about the timing of the throw, and in essence, the ball just has to get out sooner. Yeah. That's the long and short of it. So, yes, in one of those deep throws that ends up, like I say, in kind of sort of double coverage, absolutely should have been intercepted. So, from a decision-making standpoint, yes, and they were deep throws, and it ends up being incompletions. If they ended up being interceptions, it would have been turnovers at a pretty big distance. But grand scheme, no. His decision-making outside of low reward risk plays the past couple of weeks, because like I say, even on the interception, had the interceptions happened against Stanford, it would have been on 45 plus yard throws. It would have been almost like punts. It's not quite as, like I say, it's just not that egregious. So no, really, outside of, if you want to say the pick six at Wazoo or even times before that, really has not been bad at all. And to me, some of the situational splits is really the defining stuff, because when you get into fourth quarter, when you get into red zone, when you get into tight ball game kind of stuff, road, all those situational splits over his career, just look at what the numbers say. I mean, it tells the story of his, the whole perception of Bo Nix during his Auburn career. What defined it of, good Bo, bad Bo, and 1 week you get something like this, and then the next week it's looking like that. Well, look at his situational splits now, and things as simple as, fourth quarter last season, his quarterback efficiency in the fourth quarter was 96-56. No touchdowns and an interception. Now, again, remember, he got hurt. He missed the last couple of games of the season. But anything under 100 is awful. Awful. Now, in 20, he had a much higher number in the fourth quarter. And in 19, it was kind of middle of the pack. This year, he's 139.58 in the fourth quarter. And frankly, it was an even stronger number, a couple of weeks ago. So that's an area specifically. like I say, red zone, some other stat. There's a red zone stat for him beyond his own personal stat line. Bo Nix leads the country, in pass attempts and pass yards inside the red zone. He has 46 pass attempts inside the red zone. Oregon had fewer attempts last season on the whole season inside the red zone than Nix has at the halfway point. Last year, Oregon had 41 pass attempts in 14 games. It has 46 through 6 games.
I mean, James, I mean, I guess, like, just to put this in perspective, you know, I mean, we all know you covered Auburn previously. You covered the recruitment of Bo Nix to Auburn. You followed that program maybe more closely than you follow, let's say, Illinois, right, from afar. Yeah. You know, when Bo Nix transfers in, how likely did you see him having this kind of positive impact? I mean, obviously, he's coming from the SEC to the Pac-12. He's going to see different kinds of defenses. He's got a familiar offensive coordinator. There were reasons to be optimistic for him here. Where were you on that spectrum, and does this register as surprise for you?
The certain situational moments, and I don't just mean leading a game-winning drive at Wazoo. Again, he won at LSU. And I don't just say that in terms of it's really hard to win at LSU. Auburn hadn't won at LSU since 1999, prior to last season. And believe me, they were reminded of it every other year when they went there. And it became, with every passing year that they didn't win, it became a bigger and bigger thing. I mean, you had players on that team who weren't born the last time that Auburn won there, including, frankly, I think Nix might have been darn near one of them. So it became a thing in that organization in terms of this is a mountainous task to not just win on the road at one of the toughest places to play in college football, but it was like cursed to go there. And believe me, they had also been on the wrong side of some really late game blunders as well. So he won there. So I'm not saying it was some Herculean effort to necessarily win at Wazoo by comparison. So that and the performance in and of itself, big moment, big for the season. Yes, some terrific plays and throws, the one to Irving, the one to Franklin, certainly. Stunned that it occurred? No, because like I say, he'd done it before. But to put it all together in that fashion, in that circumstance, is still massive, obviously. The totality of the situational moments that he's performed extremely good at, where he had some major struggles before, that's been impressive. It has. I thought when he came in, regardless of who it was going to be, but especially him, and knowing how bad the Auburn offensive line had been for the entire time he was there, I felt that he was going to be significantly better than what he was because, like I said at the beginning, amazing how much better a quarterback plays when he's not worried about getting hit constantly. Or having to escape the pocket and extend plays and run away from the rush constantly. And you just got to call it what it is. This isn't just so far and away the best offensive line he's played behind in his college career and then therefore his career in general, because it's not like he had a better high school offensive line or something. Auburn's offensive line at times over the past 3 years, quite literally. I mean, I've had people tell me this who are in the SEC and covering the SEC now, and have that perspective. Again, I obviously hadn't been there the past couple of years. There are people telling me that might be the worst offensive line in that league, including with Vanderbilt. You know, they had transfers during his career. They had transfers and starters who came from the Ivy League. Now, I'm not saying that there can't be an Ivy League player who's worth a darn. What I'm saying is that they shouldn't be starting at an SEC program who's trying to compete for national championships. So that's the difference. When you have a quarterback who has time to make the decisions, if decision-making is a problem, ratcheting up the intensity and pressure and giving him less time to make those decisions makes the job more difficult. Give that guy that much more time. Give that guy that many more weaker defenses to play against. And you hope the results will dramatically improve. I thought Nix was a guy who could see dramatically improved results under those circumstances. And lo and behold, he is. Now, again, he's going to have some better ones to play. Okay, outside of Colorado in the second half, there's going to be some significantly better defenses he's going to have to play, starting with UCLA in the second half of the season. But I'm not blown away and mystified or stunned by the overall performance. I am impressed by certain moments and certain situational moments that, as I say, really come to define his career to date that he's done particularly well in. I am impressed that the offense has, as a whole, Nick specifically, but even the running game specifically, and certain stuff in the particularly in the tight ends and receiving core, like I just mentioned with the red zone. While we spent a couple of weeks talking about, they sell for a couple of field goals at times, and not naturally you want to score touchdowns all the time. This team's red zone efficiency is really, really, really high, extremely high. And again, Oregon being way, way up there in terms of red zone attempts. They're third in the country in red zone attempts offensively. And these are things that just, again, that you would have signed, anyone would have signed up for. Between the fact that you knew there was going to be a new quarterback and Nix coming in, how about all the stuff in terms of offseason of, hey, Kenny Dillingham, 32-year-old offensive coordinator, never called plays before. And yes, he brought in a transfer quarterback who he's worked with before, but if anybody is going to profess to have said with absolute certainty that they knew that this is what the offense is going to look like, I mean, you're kidding yourself. How? You had no basis. You had no sample. You had no data by which to go off of to make such a proclamation. Meanwhile, this is one of the most explosive offenses in the country. And those are the things that, with Nix leading it and other components of it, frankly, is addition in the run game. Not the fact that he has mobility or can run for some yards, but the level of it has been also probably, that might honestly be one of the biggest surprises, is just the extent to which he is running and they want him to run.
It's been an incredible weapon, especially on fourth down. I mean, you think about some of the most important drives of the season. Bo Nix is, by the way, he can't be Bo, he can't be Nix. He is just Bo Nix. It is scripture that it is both names at all times. Bo Nix has been an incredible asset, on those, gotta have it situations, with his legs, fourth down, and I think, on that kind of back-breaking series at the end of the first half against BYU, you saw it at Washington State, where, he gives you just an incredible degree of confidence on fourth down, from midfield on. So I think that that's been a real game changer for the Ducks as well, where, they have a guy that they believe that they can extend drives with. And that has been, to me, one of the most impressive things. I'd have to go back and look, or you could look, or somebody listening could look, probably not me, but how many scoring drives the Ducks have had this year have included Bo running for a first down at some point on that drive. I mean, I feel like it is a lot of them where he has, he has gotten them out of tricky situations with his legs, and they've gone on to take advantage and score touchdowns.
On third down runs, he has 11 carries for 92 yards.
That's incredible, and it's even more incredible that you had that at the ready, because I didn't tell you I was going there, and you just have that.
And five of those 11 carries on third down specifically have resulted in first downs.
First downs. I see. Yeah. Gotcha.
So he's been particularly, obviously particularly effective in that spot from a rushing standpoint alone. Now, some of the areas we've mentioned, like, all right, these are all the things here we're talking about, all the positivity, and certainly with Nix and offensively. As we start to talk about more going forward to the second half of the season in areas of questions, as you mentioned earlier, Bill, I think defense has to be that area, and particularly pass defense, where, as we were chatting about before we fired up the podcast, for folks who, again, if you want to put aside the Georgia game for any which reason, okay, do that. I'll grant you that, but then let's throw away the Eastern Washington game for exactly the 180-degree reason. If you want to throw away Georgia because that's 6 weeks ago and that's a juggernaut, and the poor tackling issues were to an extreme, Okay, then let's remove the next week against the FCS competition where everything was, sunshine and rainbows. All right, well, if you just go by the last 4 games, this pass defense is still one of the bottom 10 statistically in the country. And its situational spots on third down in particular are brutal. Absolutely brutal. And those are areas specifically to me that, this team absolutely has to correct, has to improve, because I don't know if it's sustainable. I don't know.
Well, we'll find out.
It's sustainable and to win. Yeah, it's sustainable and to win at a really high level.
Right.
And to compete for conference championships, if not more, while allowing 66% completions on third down. I don't know if that's remotely sustainable. No, I don't. In fact, I would suggest it probably is not in any way sustainable.
Doesn't that come into pretty clear focus next week? When you're looking at that UCLA team with a 5th-year quarterback who has, obviously been getting it done and looking like the best in the conference at times. We're going to get a sense real quick of whether or not that defense can kind of buckle up and lock in, especially against the pass when UCLA comes to town next Saturday.
To a point, yes, it can. But, and I say but because, 1, UCLA's receiving core is not that talented. And 2, because UCLA's pass defense is also terrible on third down. So it could be, here's an area of weakness for both teams. They're both going to pay attention to try and fix it during the bye. And with veteran quarterbacks on both sides, they're just still able to exploit it or not. We'll see who adjusts better in that and who improves more in that particular area statistically. But there's no sugarcoating this. Oregon has allowed, on pass defense on third down only, 27 first downs on 53 pass attempts. Only one team in the country has allowed more third down conversions on pass plays. It didn't all happen against Georgia. Some of this is just plain, you put yourself in that spot, you finally get to that area, which is supposed to be the statistical areas that are in your favor, and it flips the other way. And again, here, 3rd and 7 to 9, 3rd and at least somewhat long. Oregon has allowed 10 of 13 with 7 conversions. 76, nearly 77% completion percentage. That's 127th in the country. That's in an area where you are supposed to be at a major statistical advantage. Case in point, and Bo has obviously watched them far more than myself, Oregon State, same split, third down, 7 to 9, has allowed 1 completion on 9 attempts. How is Oregon State playing better? How is Oregon State's defense, which obviously was not good and led to a defensive coordinator change last season, how is Oregon State playing better and playing better defensively? Well, when they get to a high probability get off the field down, they're getting off the field.
Mm-hmm.
Oregon is putting itself in positions to get off the field and then says, no, it's okay, keep going. That's not sustainable if you're going to try and compete for a league championship. No, it's not. That's the difference.
Yeah, and I think not what we expected from this Ducks defense, knowing the amount of experience that they had with that front seven. And, you bring in defensive, wizards, right? Dan Lanning, gets the job because of the magic he worked with the defense at Georgia. He brings in another, former SEC coordinator in Tosh Lupoi. So it's, again, I go back to kind of what I said at the top. This whole thing feels backwards to me, because I figured it was going to be the defense that was carrying the Ducks while the offense caught up, and it's been completely the opposite. So, I guess if there is one thing that does give you some confidence for this defense, it's that you have the talent there. You have the talent. You have the brains in the film room and in the coaching suite. So, maybe that's where you derive some confidence, but it is surprising that they have been such a sieve, and especially on third down. Hearing those numbers for the first time from you is, gobsmacking.
Yeah, those are, like I said, those are numbers that are hard to do. They're hard to overcome. And as I say, you can split out the Georgia splits all you want. It's still bad. And particularly just in general pass defense. Even if you want to take out all the garbage time stuff and just say, oh, well, who cares when it was against, Stanford, Arizona, and it's a 3+ score game. Okay. Guess what? Again, no matter how small you want to make the sample, there's no sample you can come up with right now that's particularly favorable in those spots. And again, if your standard is that you want to compete for and win and take it almost as a granted that you're going to compete for and win the Pac-12 Championship, well, then you got to uphold the standards that mean playing like that. This is not a program on the way up by way of, this isn't years into a rebuild at Arizona or Colorado or even Oregon State for that matter, where you say, oh, okay, well, there's going to be some lumps, there's going to be some clunkers here or there. This is stuff that we talked about back in the start of the build here at Oregon. This is the stuff that at the beginning of the Cristobal era, under various different defensive coordinators. This is the stuff that got them beat in 2019 and cost them a chance to make it to the college football playoff. Situational awareness, third down pass defense. Do I need to bring back Arizona State? No, these are the things that get you beat. These are the things that you lose and you turn around and go, you knew it all the whole time. You knew it was a problem the whole season. And then late in November, it kills you. These are the things you have to get shored up. But if you don't want to compete for championships, then hey, everything, then every week's an adventure. Then it's okay. Then you ride the roller coaster and who cares? But if you actually want to uphold those standards, and obviously, as you know, this coaching staff and this program does, I'm talking more from a fan perspective, then you have to start to, examine, particularly during a bye week that falls in the midseason, the areas that your team is deficient and pay close attention to in the second half, whether or not there's going to be improvements. And pass defense is one, but another, probably the one that I've been, after the pass defense as a whole, probably the next focus area for me is what has been your thoughts on the pass rush as a whole? Maybe not necessarily individually, but as a whole, because that's an area to me, Bill, that admittedly I've been, I'm really not sure how to feel about it in the collective, because when you take the opponents into account and the schemes of the opponents into account, I think it's a degree of context that probably puts what have been so far less than incredibly impressive statistics into a degree of context of, all right, but when they're playing offenses that are going to do certain things and get the ball out and get the ball to the edge quick and those sorts of things, it's not quite as bad necessarily as the statistics might indicate, or as average as the statistics might indicate. But again, I'm getting way into the weeds of some of it from a broad picture standpoint. What's been your thoughts on some of the pass rush stuff?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of come into it this year thinking that it's going to be, kind of the strength of the defense because of the number of the guys that they have there. DJ Johnson, Brandon Dorlus, Swinson. But also because we talked about this coming into the year, how obviously you had Kayvon Thibodeau last year, but in terms of actual results, right? The sack numbers were way down last year historically. So what is the sack total this year? Do you have that, James?
Yeah. So far they've got 13 sacks as a defense, and over 6 games, that's a 217 per game. And that's basically in the middle of the country.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that you expected it to be better. And also, frankly, it just is going to get tougher, right? When you start looking at the quarterbacks that they are going to be facing going forward, it's DTR. Then you go a few weeks down past that, it's Michael Penix, who, certainly caught people's attention early on. And then Cam Rising in, at Utah, and they're going to have to get to these quarterbacks, especially to take the pressure off of what has so far been an, underwhelming secondary. So it's gonna have to be better. I don't know how that happens. I don't know how you get it there. But to me, that has been something that I expected to be kind of the headline for this defense, and it really hasn't been.
There will definitely be a chance for them to pad the stats a little bit because they Colorado. Do play Cal, and also Colorado. Cal and Colorado are two teams, and Colorado because they're just awful, and Cal because they have allowed 16 sacks so far in 5 games, mind you. So those are teams who they could pad their stats against considerably in that regard. But to your point, yeah, you also have Utah and Washington and UCLA and Oregon State still on the schedule. And, I mean, 4 of their next 6 opponents are the next 4 in the pecking order in the top half of the Pac-12 in terms of sacks allowed. You know, obviously Oregon's only allowed 1. The next group is Utah, Washington, UCLA, and Oregon State. So those are the better lines, the quarterbacks who either can avoid pressure by their mobility or by design. So, yeah, that's going to be a challenge. For as much as they may be able to pad their stats in 2 of the games, you know, there's 4 games where that's going to be the proving ground.
Yep.
And those negative plays are the things that, yes, could very well decide one or more of those games. Is whether or not they're, you know, are they able to get to the quarterback more than once in the course of the entire game? And if you do that in a close game against a Utah or UCLA,
right,
it makes a dramatic difference. It could change the entire complexion of a ball game with one of those kinds of plays. And yeah, you mentioned like DJ Johnson has probably done more or less what you were hoping for from him in terms of 4 sacks of the first 6 games. I mean, look, you put that over the course of a whole seaon, he's going to end up with 8 or 9 sacks.
Yep.
Well, guess what? If you're going to end up with 8 or 9 sacks, you're going to be at or near the top of the entire conference. So he's doing just fine. And Dorless has played, you know, he's played when he's played at his best, he has played really, really well. At times, some of the interior defensive tackles, while they may not be getting a ton of pass rush, they're doing very well against the run. And this is, you know, for all the things we're talking about where there's deficiencies on the defense, the run defense has been superb.
Been the best in the league.
Absolutely outstanding. So for all the, you know, for the areas that they may have deficiencies, and look, that's part of the reason why some of the pass and defensive numbers are bad too, is the opponents don't have a choice. And when the opponents get down, they're not going to run as much. They're going to throw. All understood. So again, hey, throw out the situational moments where you're up a whole bunch. Right. But I'm talking about the situational moments where you're supposed to be at a statistical advantage and it's turning into a disadvantage on those third down splits specifically. I'm talking about on sacks where you're supposed to be at a statistical advantage to get a sack on 3rd and 7+, and you aren't getting home as much as you should be because you know you can pin your ears back because the offense has to throw and you're either not getting the pressure or even when you do, the ball's still getting completed and it's turning into first downs. That's where the entire picture of, we talk about the pass defense in the secondary, we talk about now the front 7 and the pass rush. That's where it all has to work hand in hand. One will help the other and vice versa. You know, better coverage on 3rd down will help the rush get home. Better rush will obviously bail out the coverage at times. I think those are the areas, you know, that really this defense has to improve most. Because anybody can point out missed tackles. Anyone can point out missed tackles in the entire country. That's what Alabama can point out missed tackles. Georgia can point out missed tackles. Look, if you want to go back to Alabama, Texas A&M, Alabama, Texas, you can, believe me, you can go through missed tackles. So, again, some of the best defenses in the country, some of the best teams in the country can go through that every week. That's a given. I'm talking about more specifically, and I think, frankly, outside of, the Georgia game, sure. Wazoo, because of stylistically how they did things. I don't think they've had a whole lot of missed tackle problems. Even this past week. All right, late, there were a couple, but not anything particularly egregious on missed tackles. Now, there are a couple of blown assignments this past week, but not necessarily missed tackles. The 2 long runs late in the first half in particular, those were more on linebacker assignments than they were on missed tackles per se. But I think as a whole, that's some of the areas where they could improve. To wrap us up for the week, Bill, the areas as we've kind of taken it holistically, what are the areas that you think will go about defining how they'll end up finishing up here now that they're 5-1 at the midpoint? They're in the borderline of the top 10. They have this big matchup with UCLA coming up. What do you think will ultimately go about, defining this season the rest of the way for Oregon as it attempts to get to Las Vegas to play for another Pac-12 championship. And if it's going to do that, I would imagine that it can go no worse than 5-1 during the second half of the season, because I don't know if they can afford to go 4-2 and therefore be 7-2 in league play. And I suppose they could go 4-2 as long as you hold the tiebreakers over Utah and Washington, I guess. That's probably okay. And you could probably still make it to the Pac-12 Championship, assuming that USC is that other team. But if you lose 2 games and you're given the tiebreakers over Utah and Washington, that could mean a loss to UCLA and somebody else, and then UCLA might very well be that team who plays USC a second time in a championship game. So, like I say, I think they probably need to go 5-1 to at least to lock up things in terms of the play in Vegas. What do you think it's going to take on the big picture from a record standpoint, and what do you think it's going to require them to do to get there?
Yeah, I think anything more than one loss makes it tricky. Although I mean, we're gonna have to see what Utah does the rest of the way. Next week or this week is going to be massive for the Utes' hopes of staying in the mix. I mean, that might be kind of a moot point by Saturday evening. In terms of what the identity of this team is going to be, or what's going to define the rest of the way, I think at the 50% mark of the season, you generally know what a team's strengths and weaknesses are. Yes, they can improve those weaknesses. We've talked about those defensively. Obviously, the pass defense has to get better, but it's not going to go from 12th to 3rd. I mean, it's incrementally kind of, locking down and making, key plays along the way. So to me, this is going to be a team that, has to keep its foot on the gas, on the ground. I mean, this has been the best, this has been the best rushing offense, and as a result, the best offense in the conference. That has to remain, and it's been the best rush defense. So, continue to lock down defensively and then make enough big plays, defensively through the air that teams aren't able to exploit that secondary, when you are forcing them to the air, because the ground defense has been so good. So I think, those hallmarks that we've seen so far are going to have to continue to be the strengths, and they're just going to have to get, a little bit better, if not, significantly better in the areas of weakness.
I tend to agree in that. I think, look, it's a whole. You're going to win a lot of football games if you lead your league in rushing offense and rushing defense. I mean, you just are.
Yep.
Utah has won the league in 2 of the last 3 years doing it. Yeah, you're going to win a lot. You're going to win a lot if you lead the league in one of those 2 categories. You're going to win a whole lot if you lead in both. You're going to be a problem if you lead in both. And again, obviously, Utah won the league last year. It led the league in both. It played for a league title against Oregon in 2019. It led the league in both. If Oregon continues to hold true to that identity of being a great running offense and being a really stalwart run defense, it buys itself time to correct and adjust and add offensively, and to adjust and shore up things defensively. But ultimately, to me, I have the biggest concern in terms of pass defense, because how can you? I mean, you just have to. And that's with one of the better corners in the league on this team in Christian Gonzalez. But fact is they have to get better on those splits. Otherwise, like I say, I mean, you've seen it too many times, not just here. You see it across college football. Those are the moments that will lose you football games. And those are the areas that they've been getting beat consistently at times in spots where they are supposed to be at a major advantage. So that has to see a drastic improvement. When we're talking about trying to be 5-1 or 6-0 in the final 6 games, I mean, again, if you want to expand the margin of error, well, then that's a different situation. Offensively, I don't think there's a whole ton that has to be really expounded upon. Other than I think you probably want to get the development of a whether you want to say a secondary weapon or a third weapon in the receiving corps. I think Chase Cota has obviously been that at times, and pretty consistently so. Chris Hudson has offered that at times, on particularly in early downs. Terrence Ferguson was that through the first 3 or 4 games, particularly in the red zone. He's cooled off a little bit, but at the same time, he started so hot that it was going to be almost impossible to sustain the level that he was playing at the very beginning of the season. If Franklin is far and away the lead guy, and that's there, okay, fine. To me, establishing a pretty clear, absolute number 2 and 3. And look, if it's a mix and you're going to be able to get, at this point, Coda's got 19 catches, Hudson's got 14, Ferguson's got 16. If you tell me at the end of the season, and Franklin's got 27 for those without the numbers in front of them. If you tell me at the end of the season that Franklin's got over 50 catches for 900 plus yards and 3 other guys have got 30 to 35, maybe even 40 catches, that's not bad, obviously. I think in certain situational moments, yeah, you'd like to have just that, not just go-to. Again, they have go-to in Franklin. It's that, again, to me, I kind of split up the season in that September is you're trying to show who you are. October is, now that you've shown who you are, and other teams have shown who they are, what answers do you have for both your opponents and adjustments that you can make for them, and what adjustments can you make for yourself? And November, if you're going to pull away and be good, is what was your counter to their counter? And the teams who are at the very best, who are elite, who are playing for conference championships and playoff spots, are the teams who are able to counter to the counter, who are going to have answers for, all right, this is what we do. Oh, you want to take that away? Here's how we still keep it alive. That's where I think, particularly when we get to this midpoint spot, and assessing this offense specifically, I think those are the areas that, from a passing game perspective, I'd like to see and would want to see this team potentially show in the second half of the season. What is their answer for? If teams are going to try to take away Troy Franklin in this spot, how do they keep him open? If teams are going to try and take away Terrence Ferguson in the red zone, how do they still go to him? And I thought you saw that at times the past 2 weeks, including this past weekend. There was stuff formationally that Oregon did to get Troy Franklin in very favorable spots that either it may go unnoticed just in general because we're getting in the weeds, or it may go unnoticed because it's Pac-12 network and the camera angles are sometimes leave a lot to be desired. But there were times where Oregon freed up Franklin. I remember one throw specifically where he was lined up in the slot and it was a long throw over the middle, where that was just good play design. It was a good play design, a good formation. It was a way pre-snap, the way that they moved guys around in order to create that opening where they created a favorable spot, and it ends up being a 27-yard pass over the middle. That's the stuff that, they begin to show they have some answers and have some counters. You need to do that now against the better competition you're going to play in this league. You do that and hold true to the things that, like you mentioned, Bill, that you're already your strengths, you're going to be a really hard to beat team. And there's no other way around it. You're going to be a really difficult team to beat if you lead the team, if you lead the league in rushing and run defense and begin to have answers for when teams try to take your strengths away. You're going to be awfully hard to beat.
For all we've said about how much tougher the schedule gets in the second half, which it does, it still lines up real favorably in that you have UCLA, Washington, and Utah all at home.
All at home.
That's huge, and the fact there is no USC. So I mean, it might come down. And we've seen this in Oregon over the years. This might come down to what happens in Corvallis Thanksgiving weekend, and no matter how much better you think the Ducks might be than Oregon State, that is I've been to a couple games there at Research Stadium. With the construction, it's a very, very weird environment this year. You saw USC struggle with it. That could be a game of massive consequence, and that game's always more fun when there's something on the line.
And the other part of it, and we'll kind of wrap on this more or less, is we're talking about the areas where and assessing where they are, where they could be. things to improve, et cetera, all fine and well and good. But like I said, we don't lose the perspective of, for as good as this team is playing, that, as we mentioned before, this is where they ought to be. This is not. There was a coaching change, but there was a coaching change off success, not off failure. Mm-hmm. This was a 10-win team last season. I know everybody forgets that because of how the season ended. This was a 10-win team last season that, yes, had to replace a quarterback, a coach, a coordinator, et cetera. 10 wins that recruited at an elite level for 4 and 5 years, that at 5-1 has been favored in its 5 wins. So they are where they ought to be and are, quote unquote, supposed to be. And by the way, is going to be favored, and right now is in the early lines, against UCLA, will obviously be favored against Cal and Colorado. And if I had to bet on it today, and I'm not one to do so, but if I were, they will be favored in every one of their remaining games. So when we're talking about how they get to the end goal, it's not just aspirational because everyone hopes to play for a championship if you put yourself in position to do so. This is a team that was built to do so, that did so a year ago, that won the asterisk for the championship in 20, that won the championship in 19, and is built to win the championship this year. So that's the other part of this for, again, to just drive home to some folks in the fan base who want to revise and have a little bit of revisionist history by way of don't know what the expectations were for the season. No, you know exactly what the expectations were for the season. This team was picked to play for and compete for a conference championship. They are still in position to do so. We're evaluating how they could possibly do it and the things that are required to get there. But the expectation is that they're going to get there, not, oh boy, here's this plucky little team who somehow, some way, despite all the odds, got the 5-1. No, they're exactly where they're supposed to be at 5-1.
And especially again, not to belabor this point, but especially against the easy half of their schedule. Some good opponents, but it's you can say, oh, you're favored. Being favored by 3 points, here and there, as you know, is not necessarily a prediction of outcome, but it is it's certainly an indicator of who should be winning in a given week. There were games where, I think I did pick the Ducks to lose to BYU in the paper when that game came through. Definitely overestimated that defense and kind of where it was in terms of health coming off the Baylor win. But, there are games that, certainly seemed like games they could lose, and they won in, really impressive fashion. They looked dead in the water against Washington State, epic fourth quarter. So, they've taken care of the easy half of their schedule, but they've also run into some trouble, and they've found a way out of it. So that bodes well to me for, the second half as it kicks into gear next week, because you're going to see, I don't want to get too, because USC is probably the other team along with Oregon that you'd say is at the top of the conference right now. They'll see UCLA, they'll see Utah, they'll see Washington, whatever the hell is going on with Washington. And, it's going to be a tricky half, but I think that the first half has set them up for success.
Agreed. And they are today literally favored in every one of their remaining games. You can find a line available for not just UCLA. You can find a line available for Washington, Utah, and Oregon State. For Cal and Colorado, give me a break. You know what it's going to be. They are literally favored today in every one of their remaining games. So that's where we say this is a team that is exactly where they ought to be and are supposed to be, and how they get there. And so when we're talking about them in the first week in December, playing in Las Vegas, where, again, they are, quote-unquote, supposed to be. Well, if they get there, that means they will have won 11 in a row and will probably be playing an awfully good team, whether it be UCLA again or USC. Well, if they get to that point, then maybe those unbelievably infinitesimal chances after 49-3 of being alive for a playoff berth, maybe. Here's the thing, and we'll wrap on this, Bill, is – but this weekend, given that, yes, obviously, I know Oregon State is playing, obviously, but what is the assessment of around the greater landscape of when you see who's in front of them in the next couple of weeks, where obviously Oregon has UCLA first, so they got their own challenge. But when you start to see a path to potential postseason and what things start to look like, is there a game this weekend outside of Oregon State, Washington State? Is there a game this weekend that you are paying particularly close attention to that may have ramifications for the Ducks this weekend?
I mean, Utah USC is huge, right? Because if Utah beats SC, it kind of falls back into this category of, the Pac-12's top teams just kind of cannibalize each other. If USC, takes care of Utah and beats UCLA, beats a good UCLA team at the end of the year, and goes into the Pac-12 championship game undefeated, looking like a playoff team, and the Ducks have won 11 straight or whatever it is at that point, going into that game with just the Georgia loss at that point, and then can beat USC, a USC team that has looked really beatable at times this year, by the way. That to me would be sort of the path, obviously. But, if Utah beats SC and then the Ducks beat Utah and it just sort of feels like everything is circular, like we've seen before, then it gets a lot trickier. So that's probably the game of most immediate consequence to the Ducks. But I mean, you're going to start seeing some of these undefeated teams lose. I mean, you got 2 undefeated teams playing each other this week in the Big Ten, in Michigan and Penn State. Bama and Tennessee play each other. So you're going to have, you're going to start seeing a lot more, one-loss teams, and the Ducks are going to be in good company there, at least in terms of record. But you're not going to have necessarily the same, nobody else is going to have a 49-3 shellacking, non-conference shellacking, kind of dragging them down.
Yeah, agreed. There's going to be a few this weekend, and obviously, yes, the Utah SC game being at the top of the list from a conference perspective for sure. But yeah, there's several other ones in the national landscape this week that, yes, have enormous consequences in those leagues, but will have a consequence or two, particularly on the Pac-12, whether it be for Oregon, SC, UCLA, or anyone else who's hoping to make the playoff.
Oregon and UCLA could both be in the top 10 by next week, depending on how this weekend goes. I mean, this could be a 10-9, again, rankings, whatever, but like this could be a top 10 showdown just with the fact that you're going to have a couple top 10 teams taking on their first loss this week, and they're inevitably going to slide. Very,
very much possible. Very much possible. And we'll get into that one obviously next week, and we'll set that up on next week's edition of the podcast and stuff. And we'll get into the weeds and particulars of what could be, yes, a top 10 matchup between Oregon and UCLA. Whether it is or it isn't on paper is it doesn't change the fact that it's obviously a very, very significant game. So wherever it may stand in rankings is
right.
Just
it's window dressing,
small thing. Yes, it's window. It adds. It's a sales point, but I don't. Given that the game is sold out, I'm not sure who we're necessarily having to sell it to. I think our audience is already pretty dialed into the game. They're going to go. I wasn't going to pay attention. I was going to go apple picking, but now that you tell me there's a top 10 game, well, in that case.
Well, and I guess I would just say, the bigger the matchup, the higher the rankings, the sexier, that's where we talk about, playoff getting the attention of exactly, playoff stuff and making a bigger impact nationally. So there is some importance there. I don't know if it's that much different, 11 playing 12 versus 8 playing 10 or whatever it might be, but it is, I think, for the Ducks, trying to climb back from that 49-3 drubbing, every little bit helps.
Indeed, and particularly not just keep on winning, but if you beat good teams, conversely, if you were to blow the doors off a good team along the way, that's how you start to really change perceptions of your own taking one on the chin earlier on in the season. But that's a long way to go to some of those things, and we'll definitely get into the games more in the particulars. Bill, you've before we bid you adieu here, you've got some self-promotional stuff of your own here. Beyond obviously all our work on OregonLive that folks can check out in the Oregonian, you've started your own podcast with us as well. I want to make sure that folks are aware of that and check that out accordingly. So give your plug for your specific podcast.
Yeah, the podcast is called Sports by Northwest. We have a guest every week talking about kind of what's going on in the wide world of sports relative to the Pacific Northwest. We've had some great guests so far. We had Ken Simonton, the Oregon State great. We had Jackie Siles, former Portland Fire star in the WNBA, who's featured in a new documentary, and we've also had Brooke Olsendam, the Portland Trailblazers sideline reporter. So we have had a lot of fun doing it, getting it off the ground. So hopefully folks who, are listening to Ducks Confidential and reading our coverage have seen the podcast and checked it out. But if not, it, like this podcast, is available wherever you get your podcasts. Download, rate, review. And I'm sure all that holds true for Ducks Confidential too, James.
Yes. And we thank everybody who already does listen and who subscribes. And if you don't, make sure to do so that way it just ends up in your feed along with all your other favorite shows automatically. And yes, give us the likes, the reviews, the stars, the whole thing, so that way more people can find it as well. Well, we thank Bill for joining us in this week of the podcast. We will be back next week, as I say, to preview the UCLA matchup and get into anything in the weeds, specifically with that particular one between the Ducks and the Bruins, and what should be, obviously, yes, and is going to be a marquee game and probably one of the defining games for the rest of the season for Oregon. So with that, we bid you adieu here for this week, and we'll see you next week.